with that as our starting point, if you like, I'd love to explore things like the ideas we have about ourselves. And I'd love to for you to ask questions and clarify as we go, because sometimes things that can be introduced or maybe said anew, they might need a bit of teasing out or a bit of clarifying. And before we start, just check in with how you feel about yourself now. And whatever you feel, that's actually okay. So if you're ready, we'll dig in. And if anything seems weird, or you'd like me to slow down or say more or say less, please say so or ask a question, okay? So the first kind of notion is that studies suggest that the ideas we have about ourselves come from outside. Does that make sense to you? Does it seem true? Is it true in your experience? Do ideas that you have about yourself, have they come from outside? Will I give you some clues? You can unmute if you like. Just the studies have shown or seem to show that how others treated us when we were very, very young has a huge impact on how we see ourselves and how we see the world and how we see other people. Would you have any problem with that, do you think? Or does it need, should I tease it out a bit more or explain it a bit more?
I think that's very, very true, Cecily.
Yeah.
Even as an adult, I allow other people's how other people treat me, how I see myself, even as an adult, you know.
Yes. And we'll start at the beginning, but that's a really important point to mention how we are now as an adult, because that really can help other people as well. So that's so true. And I just get into how, like, people talk about abuse and all that kind of stuff. Here we're talking about something that's really subtle, that maybe happened before we had words or language or anything like that, from when we were very, very young babies, you know? And we mightn't even know what had happened. We mightn't have been able to put words on it. But basically, how others treated us comes down. The understanding now is how they held our mind in their mind. You know?
I remember, Cecily, quite clearly the phrase "children are seen, not heard" multiple times.
Yes. Yeah.
A
Yeah.
huge one.
Yeah.
Very much in our family, in my circle of friends, and in the little community, because we were just a little lived up on the hill. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you didn't have a voice.
Yeah. I know that feeling very well, but it's like, yeah, that's the feeling you can have. Yeah. And I think it's especially tough on little children who wouldn't have the words or the language or the way of saying what it is that they feel. They mightn't even know themselves. Okay. Now, the part of the problem is that people mightn't even know that they have a mind themselves. You know, the whole idea here is that, or the whole finding is that if a child is held in another person's mind in a benign kind of non-harming, non-inflammatory kind of a way, and in a reflective way. To give you an example, a reflective way might be that the parent or the caregiver knows that when they're pissed off, that it's their emotion. They mightn't automatically kind of ascribe that emotion to the child. So it's like they have a mind and they can reflect and know that that's how they're feeling. So they won't necessarily pass it on to the child. They won't necessarily get mad at the child. They won't necessarily act that out. And the key really is for the person to know that they're okay, like that they can cope. And this feeling of being okay and being able to cope actually gets passed on to the child. It's very, very subtle. Because no matter what the emotion the person is feeling or the child is feeling, there's a sense of being able to come through it, you know? There's that kind of sense there. But I think for us, we should know that this happens without words. From a child's perspective, it's actually pre-verbal, and that makes a big difference because there isn't any logic to it. You know, we can't explain, oh, this is how a person got low self-esteem, but we can have an understanding of how it happens. And words really kind of fail me here because it's like, I'll backtrack a little bit because I'm going too quickly, I think. The person responds in a particular way. Let's say the child is in distress. That's a key as well. So if the child is in distress and the person reacts to them, kind of turns away and doesn't give them the care or the protection that the child needs, that's one thing. Another that can happen very often on a regular basis for the same child. What can also happen on a regular basis or fairly regularly is there's a good enough response. And sometimes the response isn't good enough. So the child is left kind of uncertain. And both of those kind of scenarios for the child have important consequences because they set up patterns. A child who's turned away from, we find it so much harder to go and seek love or to accept love because it's a fearful situation for them. They'll be afraid of being rejected again. They mightn't even know that. It's so subtle and so in their very young child's experience, without words maybe. And these patterns then continue in how I use the word we, and how we respond to situations ourselves, because the pattern is deeply kind of embedded. If there's a pattern there to begin with, for 60% of people, this kind of insecurity pattern kind of thing doesn't usually happen, not to the same extent anyway. Because 60% of people are in the fortunate circumstance where they're being well treated by their minds are being well, people don't even know they have a mind. But I think you get the idea that the child is respected, that they're seen as a person in their own right, and that they're being responded to by a responsible individual who can respond to them and not just react out of hand or whatever. So about 60% of people are fine, they're okay, they're well treated, what we call well treated. Whereas 40% of people have either that anxiety or the turning away from love. It's extremely unfortunate. They mightn't even know. Most of us who are anxious know, I think. We can spot that in ourselves, low self-esteem and all that kind of stuff. But for somebody who turns away, that can be quite different because they're trying to avoid, they're trying to dismiss or to avoid. They might not even know it. And this is a kind of key idea. And not knowing comes from several things, partly because it's pre-verbal. But how discovering all this helped me. One, if somebody reacts badly to me on an habitual basis, I know it's mostly from their habit. There might be something in me that needs to change, probably is, but it's not my fault. I don't need to take it personally. And the second really important thing is it's not the other person's fault either. So what this comes down to is a deep kind of sense of seeing, knowing, and feeling for the other person. Because you understand. Understand isn't even the right word, because you kind of know in your heart of hearts the pain and the anxiety and the suffering and the being turned away, how that must have impacted them as a child and how it's continuing to impact how them. There was somebody, for example, who stopped trusting me about 30 years ago. And I didn't understand why until I heard afterwards what their childhood had been like. And then I began to fit the jigsaw pieces together. Now, there was no logic to it. I couldn't see any reason why they wouldn't trust me. But I can understand it from their perspective. That person has a difficulty with trusting people anyway. I used to take it so personally. I used to feel so kind of like, why? Why wouldn't they? But it's not their fault, And when you kind of understand from that perspective and you come to know kind of deep down what the other's suffering actually is, then it becomes easier to open, And there's a kind of deep love and an understanding and a forgiveness and an openness towards people that I know I wouldn't have had before. So will we just rest? Have you any questions? Or the one thing I meant to say is, how can we help them? How can we help others? We can create the kind of environment, non-verbal, interactive, how we are with people, that shows them the love and the respect and the appreciation. And we do that when we're with them, when we're thinking of them, when we hold them in mind. And we do that. Very difficult to do it on our own if we're in a conflicting kind of situation with one particular person. But if we can be in a situation or help to create an environment where that respect can grow, that's just brilliant. Okay? You rest for a tick, unless you have any questions. I'm going to send my notes on this because there's way more. I put in way more detail than I meant to, but there's way more that can be said, and I think it has helped me to understand so much. I want to pass it on. Yeah. There's no logic, just a feeling of love. If you can call that understanding or forgiveness, I don't know. Just rest for a moment. And if somebody comes to mind, just hold them in that sense of presence that you have, in that openness. And may everybody find that love and be able to reach out and give it as well. I talked way too much. But, I found finding out about these things really powerful because it helped heal relationships that I had and helped me understand. So, thank you very much